Next, we have Nekabari Goka, who is a principal business program manager at Pepco Holdings. Pepco is the parent company of Atlantic City Electric, and Nekabari is a key part of the Utility of the Future team at Pepco. He manages transportation, electrification policy, and strategy across all Pepco Holdings service territories. So that's the District of Columbia, Maryland, Delaware, and New Jersey. Before he joined the Utility of the Future team, he has spent the last 8 years in a variety of roles across the power and utilities industry, developing and honing his expertise in the areas of distributed energy resource technology policy, demand side energy management strategy, and electricity market design. So thanks for joining us, Nekabari.
No, so Amy, thank you so much for that introduction. Just confirming that you all can hear me okay. I know sometimes Zoom doesn't like to be my friend, so let's see if today is one of those days.
You sound great.
Okay. So Amy, do you have, I guess you have my presentation, or would you need me to
Are you
share
able
my
to
screen?
share it? I can pull it up if needed.
Yeah. No, I can go ahead and share.
Fantastic.
Okay. Just confirming that you all can see my screen here.
Yes, looks good.
Excellent. Okay, great. And is this, and sorry for the technical, are you all seeing the full screen version or the version that has the okay, full screen version? Great. Excellent. All right. So again, Amy, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you all for taking the time this evening to join us as we discuss, I think, call it an area of electricity market policy that I think I have a particular interest in, as many of you do, here in this call. I think, as Amy mentioned, I spent a lot of, call it the last few years or so, working in and around the utilities industry. And I think I've been fortunate enough to experience two different, call it revolutions, if you will, that have had a significant impact on the way that we think about customer engagement, the way that we think about market participation, and to Amy's point, the way we think about market design. There was the renewables revolution, right? I think we've all spent many times at conferences in which we sort of talked about the delivery or the development of renewables as a thing that was far off in the future. And then we saw as those talks about renewables turned into tangible plans by not only private sector companies, but also public sector entities as well. And I think that we're in a fortunate stage in that we're seeing the same thing happen, only this time with electric vehicles. I think we've talked about electric vehicles growing and bustling for a number of years now, and I am excited to be on this side with regard to working with the distribution utility in terms of enabling the infrastructure to support bustling growth, I think, in a very relevant and sort of important space as it relates to transportation electrification. So quick facts about Pepco Holdings. Pepco Holdings is the parent company of Atlantic City Electric. Within Pepco, you have Delmarva Power, as well as Pepco DC in Maryland, Delmarva principally in Delaware. And Pepco Holdings is an operating company that's all housed within Exelon Utilities. Exelon Utilities is an integrated energy company that has a generation business, has a retail business, but then also has a distribution utility business as well, of which we are a part. And, I think it's important to, one, talk about what we're doing at Atlantic City Electric within PHI, but then also talk about what we're doing as a whole as it relates to Exelon and climate change. I think this is a prevalent and relevant conversation now, as just recently at Exelon, we announced call it major step, if you will, in our own transformation of our utility service fleet. And so we have set, similar to a lot of the public entities and companies of which that have set very broad-based transportation electrification goals, we have done so as well. And I think that you'll hear me talk later on in this presentation around the role of the utility in pushing forward some of these transportation electrification initiatives. And I think that, not only are we sort of in a unique position to do that because we are a very, very sort of frequent customer touch point, but generally speaking, in the case of our own fleet electrification efforts, we have a lot of service vehicles. And I think that as an entity that has a lot of service vehicles that's also committed to climate change, I think that this is an important and prevalent opportunity for us to show that, we're essentially putting our money where our mouth is as it relates to transportation electrification. And so, looking forward to, working with Exelon, generally speaking, as it relates to what the entire Exelon utilities is doing around transportation electrification. So, specific to New Jersey, I think that the speakers before me have done a great job of truly setting the stage. And so a lot of this information will seem familiar because we just went through it. But ultimately, I think that New Jersey is truly leading the way with respect to both not only the policy environment, but then also the legislative environment that's truly driving the need for advanced and more explicit transportation electrification goals and opportunities. Focused primarily, of course, between the Energy Master Plan and the recent EV legislation that was just signed into law in January of this year. Here we have large and very, very substantial goals around transportation electrification. And I think what's important to note is that it's not just related to just the light duty space, but then you also have transportation electrification goals that are sort of all through different segments, right? So I think we'll often talk about kind of the importance, if you will, of the medium and the heavy duty space as it relates to reduction of carbon intensity of the transportation sector. But all of this is to say that New Jersey, I think, is truly, truly driving the way and really, really making, call it, at least from the policy and legislative perspective, easier for us to have these transportation conversations and really showing by, not only the legislature, but, recent directives from the Board of Public Utilities around the importance of transportation electrification. And I think that this is a ripe environment, I think, for us to be having these conversations, given the positive and a forward-looking policy environment in this regard. Now, as I mentioned, these goals are large. They are big. They are aggressive, but they are achievable. And I think that working on this side now with the distribution utility, I think prior to coming to the utility, I always talked or sort of opined about what the role of the utility was in moving forward some of these directives. Working on the other side for utility service companies, if you will, or companies that offer services to utilities for the management of a number of technologies, I wasn't actually always aware of the role that the utility can actually play in the development and then also facilitation of market growth in this regard. And I think that transportation electrification, particularly in the case of New Jersey, is a prime example of the ways that the utility can lean upon its unique characteristics as the utility to really drive forward the goals and objectives as laid out by the policy environment in New Jersey. So I think, there are a number of ways that you can look at this. I've tried to distill this, into 4 different segments and areas. First, the management of EV charging load. I think, as I mentioned, we've all been to conferences and things in which we talk about vehicle to grid opportunities, using EVs for demand response and using EVs for greater grid services. And I think that while there is a private sector company component to that is offering their development of the offerings that allow customers to take advantage of said opportunities, I think that the utility, as the holder of the information as it relates to distribution grid reliability, et cetera, can also provide a lot of value in providing the rate tools and incentives for customers to go about participating in managed EV charging. And I think what's important about that is to note that in a, called sort of managed versus natural charging environment, I think that there's lots of data that points to the fact that, generally speaking, if you have managed charging versus natural charging, then everybody wins. All ratepayers, from those that have EVs to those that don't, wins by better efficient management of grid resources through the use of the value of that EVs can provide. Secondly, as I mentioned, the development of innovative rate options. I think you'll hear me harp upon this idea of the EV being, or the EDC, or electric distribution utility, being in a unique position to offer solutions that others in the space, in the EV ecosystem, as the BPU often refers to it, that others may not be able to play. And I think that in terms of rate options and innovative rate designs, this is certainly an area in which the utility can provide, not only sort of innovative rate structures, but then a lot of, as I get to this third point around education of how customers can use those innovative rate structures to truly drive, efficiencies, to truly drive cost savings, and then ultimately contribute to better cost savings for not only themselves, but then also for the grid as a whole. And then, this last point here, I think, is an important one. We've often kind of talked about the importance of the equitable distribution of some of these new technologies. And I think as the utility has a mandate, if you will, to deliver electric service and then also deliver services to some of these areas, that are just as deserving as other areas to receive some of these sort of newer technologies, I think that the utility is uniquely positioned to invest in those areas in that capacity as well. So as I mentioned, this is not just, things that we are talking about, but rather these are the four areas that I've laid out on the slide before. These are things that we are actually implementing across our other service territories. While we have a program pending at the New Jersey BPU presently, we also have approved programs in our jurisdictions in the District of Columbia, Maryland, as well as Delaware with Delmarva Power. And with these sort of approved cases, I think we're doing a number of things. In addition to testing out a number of different rate designs, testing out a number of sort of incentives and rebates to incent EV uptake and greater ubiquity across the service jurisdictions. I think we're also doing a lot of things around sort of utility of the future initiatives, if you will, with electric vehicles. So thinking through how EVs can participate in greater grid services, thinking about how EVs can participate in demand response, and all the way making sure that we're focusing on educating customers around how they can take advantage of these services and opportunities. And so, as I mentioned, briefly to wrap up here, we do have some pending programs at the New Jersey BPU. And as I mentioned, a lot of these pending programs try to take advantage of the many different business structures, the many different operating structures that we've seen to have success in different jurisdictions. That is residential programs that include not only the rebates and incentives to lower the cost of installation for residential customers on the front end, but also include an opportunity to participate in the managed charging program that does, I think, the sort of, two birds with one stone agenda of increasing charging infrastructure ubiquity, while at the same time educating customers on how to efficiently manage the charging of their infrastructure there at home. We do have programs for commercial and multi-unit dwellings. Multi-unit dwellings, I think, are a significant, call it sort of area or market segment that I think is primed to see significant growth as it relates to EV infrastructure deployment. And so we have included offerings in our portfolio that speak to that. And then, also public charging infrastructure. And public charging infrastructure, as I mentioned, is important because there is an equity component, but we do have some additional rate design incentives that are meant to sort of mitigate or provide price support for some of the demand charge challenges, if you will, that sometimes you see with public charging infrastructure. So all of this, of course, is to say that we're approaching EV deployment in New Jersey with a broad portfolio approach that leverages several different business models, leverages the importance and leverages, I think, the call it advantages of the utility, while at the same time promoting private sector investment as well. Because, and our opinion is that it is a joint effort, if you will, that is going to really drive the uptake in EV infrastructure deployment that I think that the policy and legislative environments have called for here recently in New Jersey. So I know I'm just about at time, and we'll save questions for the end, but thank you all so much, and I look forward to the lightning round.
All right. Thank you, Nekabari.